Thank you, Julian. My name is Jason Johnson. I'm an alcoholic. I'm sober today only by the grace of God and the solution I found in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous in both sides of sponsorship. Glenn, thank you for the invite again. I think I was here a couple of years ago, and it's always good to be coming back. Welcome to everybody. It's new. You're wanted, welcome, and needed in Alcoholics Anonymous. And man, if you don't get anything out of my talk, or I bore you, or you just tune out, man, you need to know this: the program of Alcoholics Anonymous works, and God is real, right? And when I got here, I didn't believe any of that. My sobriety date's 11/30/07. My sponsor is a guy named Carl Morris out of Covina, California. I'm his favorite. Well, probably not right now, but I'm usually his favorite. Well, I'm self-appointed, so let's just get that out of the way, right? So, yeah. So I have him. He knows who I am. If you call him, he might have to say for Christ's sakes, Jason, because that's what he says every time I talk to him on the phone. So I don't know what that's all about, if it's just a nickname that came along or what. But yeah, so I am sponsored. I have a home group. It's called The Shed. We meet on Thursdays at noon in Oregon City, and we meet at 7 o'clock on Thursdays in the same shed. And if you're ever in the state of Oregon, or if you know somebody that's in Oregon or Southwest Washington that needs a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous or is struggling with this thing, please give me a call, right? I'll do whatever I can to make sure I get them to a meeting, or I'll just take a meeting to them. Everything I have in my life today, it's of value or any good as a result of Alcoholics Anonymous. Anything I'm going to be, it has any meaning or purpose to this world that's positive, is because of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. So again, thank you for allowing me to be here. Let's just do this and get it out of the way. My mom and dad got divorced when I was really young, like I was a baby, and my dad took off, and my mom was a hippie. I used to say she was an old hippie, but she was like 20. So I guess she wasn't really an old hippie. She was just a young hippie. But the reason I know she was a hippie is because she smelled like patchouli oil. I don't know if they have that in your guys' area, but it just stinks to me. And, we lived up in the woods with a bunch of other people that smelled like her. So I assume they were hippies too. And the thing is, man, we lived in a teepee. We lived in a log cabin. I remember once we lived in a school bus before it was popular. We just lived up in the woods, and I didn't know there was anything wrong with that. I didn't know that was different. What I know today is my mom grew pot for a living, and that's what she would do. She'd go up in the woods with a bunch of people. They'd grow pot, party, and do whatever they do, and they come back down in October, November and sell it. You know, Being up there was different, right? I knew that it was kind of cool as a little kid to be in the woods, and I didn't know there was anything different about that. But what I would know is during the day, everybody got along, but at night they would start drinking and using, and they'd start beating on each other. And I see my mom get beat up on a regular basis. And I didn't know there was anything wrong with that, because I see my mom telling that guy I love him the next morning, right? I knew it was bizarre, and I knew that it just wasn't right some way, but I didn't know that it was wrong. And that didn't make me an alcoholic. What it did is it gave me some skills in life. It gave me the ability that when I start feeling that tension, man, I learned how to de-escalate it by talking, or I'd run and hide. And those are skills I took into my adulthood, right? As a little kid, it was just normal, right? And I didn't think anything different about it. When I started going to kindergarten, my mom moved to town. And when my mom moved to town, her house was a party house, and she was 23, 24 at that time. So she's just a kid, right? And at that house, at 5 o'clock at night, I might be the only one there, or there might be a whole bunch of people there. At 2 o'clock in the morning, it's the same thing, man. At 2 o'clock in the morning, there might be 20, 30 people in that house, or I might be the only one in that house. And as a little kid, I didn't know there was anything wrong with that either. I didn't know there was a Leave It to Beaver show. I didn't know that people's parents read them bedtime stories. I didn't know that there were supposed to be people in the house all the time. And I was okay with that. I learned how to survive, right? I learned how to make popcorn on the stove. I learned how to make macaroni and cheese on the stove. I learned how to draw my own bath. And I learned how to survive when it got dark outside, right? When it got dark outside, man, I just pulled down every blind in the house, turned on every light in the house, and I turned the TV up really loud so that if somebody came, they'd think there was a party going on, and they'd go kill the neighbors and not me. And it was working, right? I made it here today. But again, I didn't know there was anything different about that. And so I was okay, right? But my life kind of changed. I was getting ready to go into the first grade, and it was a Sunday night. And I was at home watching this show called Happy Days, and the phone starts ringing. And it's not like today where it goes to voice message or it tells you who's calling. That phone rang until somebody answered it or that person gave up, man. And it was in the kitchen, and it rang all the way to commercial, right? And so I go answer the phone because I figure it must be important, and it's my grandma. And I don't know if there's any grandmas on here. All you look pretty young, but man, my grandma was too enthused about my life, right? She wanted to know if I had my clothes laid out, have I taken a bath, am I excited to go to school, stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with Happy Days, right? And so I'm just saying yes, 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 because I need her to get off the phone. But she just keeps going on and on and on. And finally I told her, Grandma, I got to go. My show's back on. And she said, Sweetie, let me talk to your mom. I said, oh, my mom's not here. She's down at the tavern. The phone number is 282-4440. If you call there, this guy Floyd's going to answer the phone, ask for Darla. She's going to come to the phone and tell you she's having one more pitcher of beer and she'll be home. And there was like a pause. I used to say it was a long pause, but it might have been 2 or 3 seconds, right? I said, Grandma, I got to go. And she said, Sweetie, give me that number again. And I gave it to her. And she said, when your show's over, I want you to go to bed. When you get up to go to school tomorrow, I want you to listen to what the teacher says and be kind to the other kids. So basically, she might have been like my first sponsor, because that's what Carl tells me today, right? Just be kind to others and generous with my time. Go, right? And so I said, okay. And I hung up that phone, and now I'm watching this show called Laverne and Shirley. And all of a sudden there's a knock on the door, man. And I kind of panic, because I'm just a little guy. And they start beating on the front door, man. And I crawl under this coffee table and this end table, and I start building the fort because I don't want to die. Right. And then they start bragging the windows, and they're banging on the windows. And I just know I'm going to die. Right. And all of a sudden I hear this, Jason, open the door. It's Grandma. Man. And I just got relief. Right. And I crawled out from that underneath that coffee table, and I went to the front door and opened it. And my grandma's standing there. And she just didn't look like Grandma, right? She looked like she'd been crying. She looked kind of mad. She just didn't have that happy-go-lucky look. And she said, Sweetie, get your stuff. You're coming to live at my house. Man, that's like hitting the lottery, right? When you go to Grandma's house, there's Rice Krispie treats, there's homemade cookies, there's popsicles in the freezer, there's sheets on the bed. The sheets match the pillowcases, but most importantly, there's somebody there all the time, right? And I'm like, man, that's an easy sell for a kid like me. So I grab my stuff and I get in her car. We drive to her house, and I'm running through the front room, headed to the kitchen. And I hear this, hey, and I turn around, and it's my grandpa. He's like, what are you doing here, man? I said, man, I live here now. I didn't know my grandma didn't run it by him. She didn't ask anything about it. She just went and got me. But what he did is he looked right at me. He says, yeah, you do, buddy. Come here. And he gave me a hug, and I fell asleep on that man's lap every single night for the next 4 or 5 years because he made me feel safe, right? And I wasn't an easy kid, man. I ended up in Alcoholics Anonymous. So I could just tell you, I'm just a different kind of breed, right? I remember my grandma dropping me off at Sunday school on Sunday mornings, and she'd push me into Sunday school class and say, he has an enthusiasm for life, and she would take off down the hall. My grandpa would drop me off in the same Sunday school class and say, hey, look, don't let his cuteness get in the way of your common sense. He's either going to be in trouble or talking his way out of trouble. That's all you need to know about that kid. And he would take off. And, and I used to think that was kind of bizarre, but, I had my first police contact when I was 8 years old. Right. I robbed a Kool-Aid stand, and I got a BB gun, a bandana, and a cowboy hat. And I rode my bike up to this Kool-Aid stand and I robbed it. And look, if you're going to rob a Kool-Aid stand, they didn't have no Kool-Aid money. All they had was Kool-Aid. Right. And so it kind of went sideways, but I watched TV. So I took a kid hostage, and I brought him back, and I tied him up to my clothesline pole in the backyard. And I told all the other kids to go get their piggy banks and bring me my money. So I'm sitting in the backyard with this kid waiting for them to bring back their money. And it's 5 o'clock on a Sunday. And my grandma yells dinner, right? If you don't go eat dinner at 5 o'clock, you don't eat, right? So I had to tell this young man, hey, I got to go. I'll be back in about 20 minutes. So I put my BB gun down, my bandana, and my cowboy hat, and I went inside to eat. And that's when it went sideways, right? And a police officer showed up. And it's not like today when a police officer shows up, everybody records it. Back then, your whole neighborhood showed up, right? So everybody in my neighborhood's in my backyard. The police officer's there. My grandpa's kind of looking at people. This kid's crying, and I'm trying to explain to my grandma that the knots wouldn't be so tight if he wasn't squirming. It's not my fault, and all of a sudden my grandpa starts laughing really loud. And that set my grandma off, man. She lost it. She's asked him, what's so funny? He goes, man, you can't make this up. And that even more made her more mad because everybody started laughing. And she said, Jason, you're grounded to the house for 30 days. Get inside. So now I'm crying. I had never been grounded before, but it didn't sound good. And so this is where my grandpa and I's relationship changed. He said, hold on a second, buddy. And he went in behind the house with my grandma, because I guess you don't argue in public back then. And he comes back and said, look, buddy, I didn't tie that young man up to the clothesline pole. There's no need to ground you to the inside of the house for 30 days. You're grounded to the block. Man, and just like that guy became my hero, right? He taught me that when you get caught, to share in a general way. He taught me that you don't have to always do certain things. And man, I thought he's the man, right? But what happened as I got older, man, he started turning me in, right? He started telling the police where I was at. Every time I got in trouble, he just became a problem. And I used to think he became a problem because I thought he didn't like me, right? I thought he just, was not happy with me, right? And so as I got older, we grew apart, right? What I know today is he was a good man. He's the kind of guy that if you dropped a quarter on the ground, he'd spend $1 to get it back to you if he knew it was yours. He was just a good human being, right? And I was a wild kid. My grandma, on the other hand, I thought she felt sorry for me, right? Because all my other cousins, everybody had families, all that. And if anybody went on vacation, they had to take Jason. If I had a baseball game, everybody had to show up. And I believe that was because my grandma told them to, right? So I always felt that she felt sorry for me. But I remember I went to middle school, 6th grade, and we had to start taking a school bus. And, the first 3 months didn't go really well. And I got kicked off the school bus. And I remember thinking to myself, man, I got to walk home. And it's like a mile or two to my house. And I remember getting ready to walk home and I see my grandma pull up at the school. And I thought, man, she's here to save me. She said, sweetie, we need to go inside and talk to some people, which is not an unusual thing for a guy like me, right? And I said, okay. And we went into this room and there was a round table and there was a teacher, a principal, a lady from a special needs school, and a couple of counselors on one side, and then two seats where my grandma and I sat down. And they proceeded to tell my grandma everything I'd done wrong for the first 3 months of school, that I had no self-control, that I hit other kids, that I had no potential, that I couldn't read or write at that level, so they didn't understand how I made it to that grade. And man, they just made me look bad, right? And I remember looking at my grandma and she hadn't said anything. She was just sitting there staring, right? And I just remember thinking, man, this isn't going well. And then finally, when they get done saying everything that I'd done, which is quite a bit, my grandma said, may I say something? They said, yes, you can. And she said, look, I'm not going to deny Jason did any of those things. He lives at my house. He's a tough kid, but he's a good kid. And there's a good person inside of there. And she pointed at me and she goes, the reason I know there's a good person inside there is because every morning he runs down to Mrs. Harrington's house and throws her newspaper up on the porch so she doesn't have to come down the stairs on his way to school. And the young man, Shane, who's simple-minded, every time I see him at the grocery store on or church on Sunday in the grocery store, the first thing he asks is, where's Jason? Because nobody picks on him when Jason's around. And when they play sports, Jason always picks him first to be on his team. Nobody told Jason to do those things. He just did them. So I know there's a good kid inside of there and he's a good person. I think it's our responsibility to tap into that. And, I ended up having my best year at school that year. But I remember walking out of that classroom thing and walking down that hall and looking up at my grandma for the first time in my life, believing somebody loved me. Right. I never had felt that before. I never knew that anybody really had my back, man. And that lady became my best friend. And anywhere she went, I went. I better get drunk. That kid I tied up to the clothesline pole, his name was Sean. He became one of my best friends. So obviously I need Alan on because I took a hostage right off the bat. Right. And so it's a Friday night and Sean and I are going to go over to Leif's house and sleep in the backyard. And in Oregon, you don't sleep in the backyard a lot. It rains here, but it was a Friday night and it was nice. And we go over there and we're setting up the backyard and Leif's mom comes out and says, hey, there's $10 on the counter. We ordered you guys a pizza. Pay the pizza guy. All the adults are going bowling. Stay in the house. And we said, great. They left. The pizza came. And my friend Leif says, pizza tastes better with beer. I'd never drank beer before, but I said, yes, it does. And so he went downstairs and he brought up this case of Lucky Lager beer. I don't know if any of you ever drank that, but it's nasty, right? Look, when I took my first drink of alcohol, I didn't have that, ooh, I have arrived. I didn't have that feeling of, oh, it's going to be great. Man, I had to plug my nose and hang in there, man. It was nasty. But I did, and within an hour or so, something like that, man, I'm having a good time. We're in the backyard. We're throwing rocks at cars. We're just having a good time, right? But something happened about hour 2 or hour 3, man. I started getting sick and I got food poisoning, man. And I remember looking at my friends. I said, man, there must be something wrong with that pizza. I don't feel good. And they just looked at me and I said, I got to ride. I'm going home. And so I got on my bike to ride home, which Leif said was my first DUI. But I rode my bike home and I would go in the house. I told my grandma I don't feel good. And I went to bed, man, and I'm sick all night, man. And there's nobody checking on me. Nobody's asking me how I'm doing. I'm just sick. And the next morning I wake up and my grandpa's at the end of my bed yelling, get up, you got to go to work. I was like, man, I don't feel good. He said, get up, you got to go to work. I said, Grandpa, I don't have a job. He said, if you're going to work like a big boy, you're going to drink like a big boy. Now let's go. And he was serious. So I got up and I remember thinking, well, my grandma won't let this happen. And as I'm walking out, my grandma hands me a warm egg salad sandwich and a thermos of warm milk and tells me, have a great day. Right. And I'm like, man, and we went over and we picked up Leif and Sean and my grandpa took us to pick strawberries. It's against the law in the state of Oregon to have anybody under 12 years old pick strawberries nowadays. And nobody's ever thanked me for that. But man, it was the worst day of my life. I picked strawberries. I got sick. I picked strawberries. I got sick. I picked strawberries. I got sick. And eventually I just looked at my buddy and I said, man, I'm not drinking anymore. And he said, you're not going to drink anymore? I said, no, I'm done with that stuff. He goes, you didn't like the alcohol? I said, I don't mind the alcohol. I just don't want to work. Right. So I quit cold turkey. No AA, no 12 steps, no treatment, no nothing, man. I just quit. But here's because of the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and looking at a thorough first step, I realized that my addiction and my alcoholism kicked in when I was a freshman in high school, right? That mental obsession kicked in where, man, I started saving my lunch money Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, pitching in with some other guys and shoulder tapping and drinking on the weekends. So we played sports during the week and we drank on the weekends. Nobody was going to jail. Nobody was going to dying of drug overdose. We were just having fun, man. And that's how my life was, man. I was good at sports. I played sports during the week and we drink on the weekends. And everything was going good till May 5th, 1989. And that was when alcohol had its first incident that really stood out. I stole the motorcycle and I got in a high-speed chase with the cops and I crashed. And I woke up in the ICU not knowing what happened. And I started asking this nurse, questions like, what happened? Am I going to die? The things you do when you come out of a blackout kind of thing. And I asked this nurse what happened. She said, you're in a drunk driving accident on a motorcycle. I said, I don't own a motorcycle. She said, oh, we know that too. And she said, the police have been here and they'll be back. And I said, okay. And I said, am I going to die? She said, you're not going to die, but you'll probably lose your left leg. And if you don't lose your left leg, you'll never walk normal again. And I remember thinking to myself, man, at least I didn't kill anybody and at least I'm not dead. You know what? I'm never going to drink alcohol again. And I made that decision right there in that hospital. About 2 weeks after I got out of that hospital, man, the only thing I could do to kill this anxiety and this fear and this shame and this guilt that I had inside of me that I didn't understand was to put alcohol in my body. And what I would do is I would just lower my standards to keep up with my quality of life. Right. So eventually I'm living in an abandoned house that's somebody's uncle's house until the police come and nobody knows whose house it is. It's one of those houses that has no water, no electricity, but a bunch of people hang out there. And when I put alcohol in my body, that's okay. Right. And, the weird thing was about once a month, one of my uncles would show up wherever I was staying and they'd drag me down to a payphone and say, hey, you got to call grandma. I go, why do I got to call grandma? And she said, because she calls every hospital, every jail, every institution. Then she calls all your friends. And then she calls all of us every single morning. Anybody seen Jason? Anybody know where Jason is? Can somebody please go find Jason? You need to call her and tell her you're alive so she'll quit calling us. And so I'd make that phone call and I'd tell my grandma, man, I'm doing really good and I'm working out of town and I'll come see you. Or I'd tell her I'd come see her that day, and I meant that with all my heart because I love that lady more than anything in the world. But when I put alcohol in my body, I can rationalize and justify why I don't show up. Right. And what I would tell myself is, man, if I'm not seeing you face to face, I'm not lying to your face and I'm not stealing from you. So I'm doing you a favor. Right. And so that was my decision why I wouldn't go. But every once in a while I would go and I'd sit at that kitchen table and I'd talk to my grandma and she'd do what she always does. She'd put $5 on the counter, $5 sticking out of her purse, and she'd walk to the bathroom and she knew I would steal it and I would. Right. I'd steal that money and I'd go do what I had to do. And I would do that over and over and over and over. And all I know is today is I didn't know that she didn't have a solution. She didn't have an Al-Anon. She just had a God she believed in and she just prayed for me. And her grandson was dying. Right. But when I put alcohol in my body, I don't look at it that way. And that would go on and on for many years. On probably December 1st, 1997, my Uncle Leroy showed up in my tent. I got kicked out of a abandoned house. So now I'm in a tent before that was popular. And I'm in this tent. And my Uncle Leroy shows up and he lets me know that my grandma had been in ICU for a couple of weeks, but they just took her off of life support, that I should probably come say goodbye. I said, man, I don't really want to go. And he said, I'm not here to ask you if you want to go. You're going to go. And so he's a bigger biker guy than I am. And so I got up and I get in his truck. And as soon as we get in his truck, he hands me a pint of vodka and he says, man, just chug this. This will make it okay. And I chugged that vodka. And by the time I got to that hospital, man, I'm okay knowing that I'm a piece of crap and I'm not going to amount to anything. I know that, look, I'm the guy that even at a drug house at the end of my running, if there was a commercial for a treatment center, come on, everybody would stop what they were doing and look at me. Right. And that's how it was at family reunions. I'm just that guy. I'm the guy that does everything wrong. I'm the guy that steals everything. I'm the guy that just causes the commotion. But I'm also the guy that everybody wants around because I'm funny and I have a good time. But I'm just a mess. Right. And I get off that elevator and my family, when somebody's in the ICU, there's only 2 or 3 people can go in a room at a time. I have a big family and they're all sitting on one side of the waiting room. And so I go to the other side and I sit down and not one person comes over to talk to me. Not even my mom. And eventually my aunt comes over, my Aunt Sandy, and she walks over and says, you need to get in there, say goodbye, and just get out of here. I said, okay. And I went in there. My Uncle Gary was sitting there with my Uncle John. And my Uncle Gary said, man, just talk to her like she's here. She hasn't been awake all day, but she knows she can hear you. Just talk to her. She's like, here, and take as long as you want. Don't worry about anything else. And so I sat down and I grabbed her hand and I started talking to her and she opened up her eyes and I started talking to her some more and she started talking back to me, man. And I panicked because people started running to the door because people had flown in to see her. So people are starting trying to come in and I didn't know what to do, man. I just got scared and I nutted up and I told my grandma, man, I'm doing really good. I have a great job. But there's a lot of people here that would like to see you, Grandma. I think I'll come back tomorrow and visit with you. And she said, okay. And she told me she loved me and she would pray for me like she always did. And I said, thanks. And as I was getting to walk out, she told my Uncle Gary, he's a good kid. You watch, he's going to do something with his life. He's going to do something positive for this world. And I remember thinking to myself, my God, this lady just doesn't give up, man. And I just nutted up and I went back to my tent and I drank the way you drink, right? A couple of days later, my uncle Dale showed up to let me know that my grandma had passed and that his family would pick me up in a couple of days and take me to the funeral and I could sit with them. And I said, okay. And the day for that funeral came, man, I hid in the closet with a bottle of Goldschlager and some Jägermeister, and I didn't come out because I had a lot of fear, right? But when I put alcohol in my body, I can justify why I'm hiding in a closet, right? That I wasn't there for when she was alive. Why would I show up in front of all those people, right? And I did that dance you have to do. And I could hear him yelling out there, hey, you're going to regret this for the rest of your life. But at that point in my life, I didn't care, man. I just wanted to die, right? So I didn't go to the memorial. And the next couple of weeks were miserable, and basically what happens 2 weeks after this all went down, I hadn't put anything in my body for a few days, and I got caught up in the moment, and I called my uncle and asked him for help. And the next thing I know, he got me in this detox center, right? And I'm in this detox center, and it's the worst detox center in the state of Oregon, if anybody wants to know. But it's one of these detox centers that had no caffeine, no sugar, and no women, right? I'm 26 years old. These are some big deals, right? There should be something like that in this thing, right? And I didn't know I didn't know you could leave. I thought it was like prison, right? So I'm watching the shift changes. I'm watching the elevator go up and down. I'm watching food exchanges because I need to bust out of this place because this was a bad idea, right? But here's the problem. It was December 29th, 1997. And in this detox center at that time, there was only 5 people, and there was 4 guys and me. And so these 4 guys were talking about this thing called Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, what's Alcoholics Anonymous? And this is the miracle that got me to AA. They told me there's caffeine, there's sugar, and there's women. I was like, great. Where do we go? They said a van's going to pick us up and take us to this meeting. I said, even better, man. I can escape from there, right? So we get in this van to go to this AA meeting on a Tuesday night. And I'm here to tell you that, I'll go back 3 years before this all went down. My dad, who I hadn't seen in 26 years, called my mom to pay back all the back child support he owed. I went to this bank for 2 or 3 minutes to see this guy. I walked in there. I said hi to him. I took on half of the money, which I had to pay back because of sponsorship. Said hi to this guy, and I left because I don't need a dad. Flashback 3 years now where I'm at, I'm in this van going to this thing called A&A, and I prayed to a God that I don't really understand or I don't believe in. I said, please, God, don't let me know anybody in AA. And if I do, please don't let me owe him any money. That's the only prayers I had coming to you guys. And, we get to this AA meeting, we get out, we walk in there, and there's caffeine, there's some sugar on the table, and there's some women, right? And so I'm sitting at this table looking at all these women trying to figure out who I'm going to marry to bust me out of this detox prison thing I'm in. And I see a guy standing in the back. And I looked at the guys. I said, man, that looks like my dad. They go, you don't know who your dad is? I said, I've seen him one time in 26 years, 29 years. And they said, man, you got to go say something. Well, there was a break at this meeting. So I took my new gang and I walk up to this guy. I said, hey, do you know who I am? He said, nope. I said, I think you're my dad. And he said, Jason. I said, yeah. And I met my dad at my very first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And man, it changed my life, right? He was doing a 9th step when he came to make amends to my mom. He was an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous until the day he passed. He passed right before COVID. And you know what? He changed my life. He picked me up, took me to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous where I met a girl. I kissed her. She got pregnant, and then she got divorced, and then we got married. So if you're new here, that's not how you do relationships. But when you're Jason Johnson, that's how I did it, right? And my life started going better, right? I got a job, I bought a house, I have a family now, but I was only going to 1 meeting a month. And so if you're new here, you need to hear this because I was going to 1 meeting a month. And the only reason I was going to this meeting, it was a big speakers meeting. It was like 600 people. And I was the raffle chair, and I was stealing half the money, which I had to pay back because of sponsorship. But, I was going to this meeting once a month, and I didn't want to go on this month. So I told my wife I didn't want to go. And we got in a big argument. And I asked her for a divorce. I didn't know you could. She just said no. I didn't know you could do that, right? I thought you had to get an attorney. She said, I'm going to the meeting. Maybe you should go. I said, screw AA. And what she did is she took off for the meeting, and I did what every good alcoholic does when he's getting ready to leave AA. I went and wrote a resignation letter to Alcoholics Anonymous, right? I got a big book and a Bible, and I got on the computer, and I wrote up this letter, and I dated it, and I signed it, and I put it in this envelope. And I figured I'd take it to this guy named John B. John B, I thought, was the president of AA in the state of Oregon because he had a whole bunch of notigans. I don't know what you guys call them, pigeons, sponsies, or whatever. I call them notigans because they're the kind of guys you would show up at his home group and they'd all be greeting. And I'm like, good God, not again. Because they want to shake your hand, ask you how you're doing, questions like that. Or they would get called on in meetings, the guys he sponsors, and they talk about God, sponsorship to allergy to the body, obsession to the mind, everything that has absolutely nothing to do with Alcoholics Anonymous when I thought. And so I just called them notigans, right? And he had a whole bunch of them, and he was the chair of this big speakers meeting. So I just assumed he was the president of AA. So I get to this meeting, and there's like 600 people, and he's at the front, and I walk up there, and I hand him my letter of resignation, and he opens it up, and he starts reading it, and he starts laughing, like really loud, like Disneyland laughing, and all these notigans are swarming around, and they're passing the letter around, and they're laughing, which still haunts me today. But All of a sudden, John looks at me and he says, no. I go, what do you mean, no? He goes, no, I'm not going to allow you to leave Alcoholics Anonymous. And what accidentally came out of my mouth is, will you sponsor me? Oh, he quit laughing just like that. He said, are you willing to go to any length for victory over alcohol? And I thought to myself, man, I was just resigning with a letter from AA that's going to haunt me forever, right? I said, yeah, whatever. And he said, this is what you're going to do, buddy. He says, you're going to get on your knees every night. Or every morning, you're going to say, please help, thank you, amen. And every night, you're going to get on your knees and you're just going to say, thanks. God don't need to hear any more from you. You'll be trying to con him. He said, you're going to call me every morning at 6:30. You're going to go to 5 meetings a week, 2 where I'm at. You're going to read 2 pages out of the big book. You're not going to drink in between meetings. He said, if you can do those things, your life's going to get better in spite of you. Man, and I just remember thinking to myself, that's a lot. But here's the thing, within 30 days, man, I was a head Nottingham, right? My job, I was a head greeter. I mean, I was self-appointed there too, but I was the head greeter. My job in Alcoholics Anonymous was to shake every woman's hand that walked into my group, look her in the eye and make sure she felt safe. Every man that walked into the room, I had to hug him, tell him I love him, and I'm doing better every day in every way. Very unnecessary, very uncalled for, very awkward. But I did it, right? And man, I became a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And man, the next 4 or 5 years were awesome. But at about year nine, man, I couldn't stand you people. Right. I knew what Glenn was going to say at the meeting. I knew Alan was going to be visiting from out of town. I knew Lori was going to have a birthday and it'd be the same damn thing, same people, same relatives, same everything. Right. It just became a nuisance. Right. So I just started judging people and sitting in the back row, making fun of everybody. Right. And so it got really bad. So I started selling drugs. Right. And I don't know if there's anybody in here ever thought selling drugs sober, but I did pretty good at it. Right. And I'm at year 9 and I'm selling these drugs and life's going pretty good. And I bought a car and I took it to this place called Les Schwab and I put some wheels and tires on it and I pulled out, my wheel fell off and they ended up renting me a Chrysler 300, this rental car, right? And this Chrysler 300 looked like a Rolls Royce that said Hemi on the side. And so I'm in this car and I pull out and I go to meet this guy I've been meeting every day for about a year. And as I get done meeting him, as I'm pulling away, all of a sudden all these cop cars swarm my car. And I guess they call it a task force, right? And man, I didn't know what to do, but you know what? I have a valid driver's license, proof of insurance. It's a rental car, and I haven't had a drink or drug in 9 years. So I'll just put the dope. I had their police report says 157 grams of meth. So I had a small basketball size of meth. And so I figured, well, I'll just put it under the front seat because I didn't know I'd only been in the car at one time. I'll figure out, I didn't know where to hide it, right? So I slowly put the dope underneath the front seat and I'm sitting there waiting for them. And it takes them a little bit. And finally, an officer walks up to the window and I roll it down. And he says, Jason, which is another bad sign. He didn't even ask me for any ID. He said, could you shut the car off and step up on the curb? And I said, I can do that. And so I shut the car off and I opened up the door. And as I'm getting down, I hear this, and I look down and the seat's moving back all by itself. I've never had a car with a memory seat. And the seat went all the way back and my dope is in the middle of the floor, right? And you can't yell do-over and you can't yell timeout and you can't reach down, right? So you're kind of just, I can't tell you what I was saying, but it wasn't polite, right? But I was thinking to myself, what the heck just happened here? And, I didn't know what to do. So I just shut the door and hoped they didn't see it. And they did. And I got charged with commercial delivery, commercial possession, racketeering, intimidation of a federal witness, and a gun charge with 9 years of sobriety, going to meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, trying to steal a seat, judging people in there, right? And my life went sideways really fast. I put a needle in my arm and I started doing things I never thought I would do. My wife divorced me, which was a great call on her behalf. She has remarried me, which some people think is a little bizarre, but I burned it to the ground, right? And I ended up getting sentenced to 48 months in prison. But here's the thing. My first 3 weeks of being locked up, I was in the hole by myself. And, I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. I was detoxing. I was sweating from the inside out. I was just miserable, right? And I didn't know what to do, but I could hear John's voice say, you probably should get on your knees, dummy. And I get on my knees and I say, please help, thank you, amen. And I get back on that bunk. And if I got any kind of relief, I got back on my knees and I said, thanks. And I would do that over and over and over. Eventually, maybe day 3, day 4, I remember sitting on that bunk, looking at this piece of metal above the toilet, thinking to myself, man, I'm a piece of crap, right? They have the right guy. They've got the right guy locked up. And I remember looking in there and thinking, I become the guy I despise, right? And I got on my knees and I just said, please help. And what I did is I admitted to my innermost self and nobody else, just me and God, that I have a drinking problem and my life changed, right? I didn't have to share it with anybody else. I just had to admit it to my innermost self that I have a problem and my life got a little bit better. I got put into population at 3 months and 27 days at a 4-year sentence. Some judges in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous in my area signed some paperwork and I got a suspended sentence. So I got released to serve my time in the community. And all I had to do was get sober and get a job. Lord, I didn't know that there was members of Alcoholics Anonymous, judges and members of Alcoholics Anonymous, but they saved my life, right? And I got out and I became an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous in good standing. And I'm grateful for my sobriety date, and I never take that for granted. I got out and my life changed, right? I had to start doing the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I started acting as if, and I had to start getting involved. But I also had to clean up a lot of stuff. My daughter, when I got locked up, was 7 years old. And man, I remember signing the rights away from my daughter for $20 in a ride to a drug house, right? That's what it came down to. That's the guy I am. I'm the kind of guy that gives up everything that has any value, meaning, or purpose to chase that drink. Right. And I would do that over and over. Today I have a great relationship with my daughter. She's getting ready to get married. She's 25. She's going to law school. I always tell this story right here. Last year, maybe a year and a half ago, there was a whole bunch of these sorority girls in our house, and they're trying to talk my daughter into running for president of the United States and at her college. Right. And so I said, hey, can I have a cabinet position? And she said, no. She didn't even hesitate. Right. She said, absolutely not. I said, well, what can I do at the White House? And she said, Dad, you could be a greeter. I was like, yeah. So if my daughter ever makes it the president of the United States, I will be a greeter at the White House. You're probably going to want to get there pretty fast. But that's one of the best blessings of that whole thing is I remember standing there at the sink, and one of the girls asked my daughter, she said, hey, isn't your dad's past going to hurt you? Because my daughter wants to be a judge. She's going to law school. She says, isn't your dad's past going to hurt you? And without even skipping a beat, my daughter looked right at me and said, my dad's past is one of my greatest assets. So the program of Alcoholics Anonymous has changed my daughter also, right? She's seen her dad burn it to the ground and get it back and do other things. That's an amazing thing to have that gift to be able to do that. I'm not always the best dad in the world. I remember when my daughter was 17 years old, my wife came to me and said, hey, we're going to go on vacation. I said, where are we going? She said, Canada. At that time, I couldn't get into Canada. I said, I can't go there. She said, we know. And away they went, and they went on vacation. And man, they're gone for like 2 weeks, man. And I'm at home dog sitting. Well, I guess I was just watching my dogs. I guess you don't dog sit your own dogs, but it felt like I was dog sitting my own dogs. And they're gone for 2 weeks, and they come back, and my daughter goes straight upstairs to her room, and my wife comes in the kitchen and says, hey, we need to talk. I said, what's up? She said, I need to tell you something. You can't overreact. I said, sure, give it to me. She said, when we were in Canada, Bailey got a tattoo. Oh, I wasn't ready for that. I saw tramp stamp. I saw strippers pulls. I saw Aerosmith videos. Man, I went batshit crazy, right? I told my wife she's going to jail. I said, it's against the law to get a minor a tattoo. I said, yeah, we're getting a divorce. You're going to jail. I mean, I called her names. I just couldn't believe she would do something like that, right? And she's looking at me like I'm crazy. So I went up to my daughter's room, man, and I gave her everything I had. And I said things to my daughter that if any of you said that, I have no problem going back to prison. Right. And I yelled at her. I told her what I thought about her body. I told her what she was doing with her life and how she's going to ruin her life with that tramp stamp and all this kind of stuff. And she just sat there crying and looking at me like she was scared to death. And so I went back downstairs, and my wife said, this is where we different stories. I got my car because I wanted to call an Al-Anon, right? Because I figured Al-Anon would know how to get my wife divorced, how to get her arrested, and probably know how to get that tattoo off of my daughter's back, right? And so I get in my car and I call an Al-Anon, and I'm talking to her on speakerphone in my car. And here's the difference between AA and Al-Anon. In AA, if I ask Phil a question about alcoholism, he's going to give me the solution before I'm even done talking about the problem, right? That's what AA does. Al-Anon, I don't know what they do. I don't know if they think about it. I don't know if they write it down. I don't know if they text the problem out, wait for people to respond. It took this lady like 3 miles before she responded to what I was talking about. Finally, she said, you want to know what I just heard, Jason? I said, yeah, what did you just hear? She said, man, you just told your daughter that she's not beautiful and any decisions she makes are not to your standards and her body's your body. She said a lot of stuff that made me sound bad. I said, man, I didn't mean it like that. She said, that's what I heard, and I believe that's what your daughter heard. I said, man, what do I do? She goes, you got to go back and make that right. And I could hear her husband in the background going, you better invite God to go with you. So I'm driving down the road going like this in the speakerphone because I don't need his help, right? So I go back to my house and I sit in my driveway and I say that prayer, God, I need some help. I sure wish you'd show up. And I went back in the house and I told my wife I overreacted. She said, you did. And I went upstairs and my daughter's still crying. Maybe 20, 30 minutes later, she's still crying on that bed. And I had to make an amends. I had to apologize. I had to tell her, man, I don't care what you do with your body. I don't care who you love. I don't care what you believe in. I just don't care. All you need to know is I love you no matter what. And that's it. And my job on this world is to make sure that your life is better. She said, I know, Dad. She said, you want to see the tattoo? I'm like, oh, man. Oh, okay. And she lifts up her shirt, and on the side of her chest, there's an AA symbol, and it says 1 day at a time. And there's a hand going like this and a hand going like this. My first thought, but it's my inside voice. I didn't say anything. I was like, good God, I hope you're not an alcoholic. And the second was, what's with the praying hands? We're not Catholic. But I didn't say that out loud. She says, you want to know what it means? And I said, sure. She said, if it wasn't for Alcoholics Anonymous, you and mom would have never met and I wouldn't be here. I was like, man, that's pretty good. She said, the hand going like this is mom's hand because she's always serving the cookies and making the coffee for the meetings. And the hand going like this is yours, Dad, because you're always welcoming people to Alcoholics Anonymous and giving them a hand up. So now I'm sitting on the edge of the bed crying. Paulie Pistol said that was God kicking me in the nuts, right? And so I try to avoid that lady like the plague. But that's the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I can make total mistakes, but if I go back and make that right, I can get the gift. And today my wife and my daughter, my relationships are good with them. My grandparents, on the other hand, my grandma was dead and I didn't know how to do that one very good, but my grandpa was still alive. And so I went to my grandpa's house and said, Grandpa, I don't know if you know this or not, but I'm an Alcoholics Anonymous. He goes, Jason, everybody knows you're an Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, yeah, I go, but I don't know if you know this, but I borrowed and stole a lot of money from you and grandma and I need to pay it back. And he goes, oh, I know. And he goes, I don't know how much it was. He goes, I do. I go, what? And he goes into my grandma's room and he comes back and he has these spiral notebooks. My grandma was like the mob, right? From like 1974, she had wrote down everything I'd ever borrowed, everything I ever stole. Like Jason has 25 cents credit. Jason mowed the lawn. Jason did, man, every insurance, doctor bill, ticket, made up story. She had it all documented till like, I don't know, 95. And I'm like, Jesus, this, she's a little old lady, goes to church. Now she's the mob all of a sudden. And I said, man, I can't pay all that. I mean, there was like stacks of books. I said, I can't pay all this money back. My grandpa goes, oh, I know you can't. I said, what can I do to make it right? He said, you just keep helping people. I said, that's great. But when you're looking at these books, it's like the story of your life, right? Even though it's in numbers. But so I'm looking at it in 1984, it said Jason stole $5. Jason stole $5. Jason stole $5 for like a page, right? And so I'm like, geez. So I go to my grandpa. I said, hey, how do you know I stole this $5 in 1984? He goes, oh, that's an easy one. I go, how's that? He goes, well, every Thursday I put $5 in the coffee cup in the hutch, and every Friday morning it was gone. The only person who lives here is the author of those books, the person who put the money in there, and you. Who do you think stole it? I said, well, man, Grandpa, if you knew I was stealing it, why did you keep putting it back in there? And he said something to me. This is the guy I thought hated me. This is what he said to me. He said, Jason, stealing isn't wrong until it's wrong to you. And I'd rather you steal from me than our neighbors or your friends. And that's the guy I thought was out to get me, man. I thought that was the guy that hated me. And I looked at him and I didn't know what to say, right? And I got up and I got in my car and I called John. He said, how much money you have to pay back? I said, none. So I went back and I told my grandpa that I guess that's not going to work. We got to figure something out. I ended up buying my grandpa cable TV till the day he died. And I remember about 2 weeks after he got the cable TV, he called me and he's like all excited. I mean, he's the only guy I know that's watched every channel. He watched that channel for 10 minutes that just buzzes with the line. He watched it he gave every channel some time, right? And we talked about Pawn Stars. We talked about the History Channel. We talked about ESPN being on. We talked about news. I mean, we talked for probably a couple hours just on all the movies and all the shows. And he was just amazed. And at the end of that conversation, he said to me, man, this is one of the coolest gifts anybody's ever gotten me. I was making amends for what I had done and what I stole. And I got the gift, right? When my grandpa died, we were good. And, my grandma, on the other hand, man, she was a dead. And I don't know if anybody in here on the screen has somebody that believed in her no matter what. Or somebody that just always had your back, even though, and then maybe they didn't get to see you get sober. Maybe they haven't got to see you get sober. Maybe something happened and they passed on. And that's how it was for my grandma. And, I had that ache inside that I treated that person so poorly, so badly. And I wish she could see me today. And I didn't know how to do that. And I went to the grave site. I looked for dragonflies, butterflies, potato bugs, ants. I wrote letters. I took flowers. I've done everything that you guys suggested to me to do. And I would get relief, but I wouldn't get that ache to go away they talk about, right? One day I'm flying back on a plane and I get this text from this guy named Jimmy Jack. And it's a story about this little boy. And it changed my life. This little boy was the firstborn in his family. And his sisters were born and his dad started paying attention to his sisters more. And he got jealous, but he knew his dad loved football. So he went to his mom and dad and asked if he could sign up for football. And they signed him up. And right away, this little boy knew this was a bad idea, right? Because he's not an athlete. He's a trumpet player, basically, right? But he keeps playing football because his dad, after every practice and every game, his dad would come up and give him a hug and tell him he loved him and how proud he was of him. So the boy just kept playing even though he didn't like it. His senior year of school, his team's going to the state championship for the first time. And it's a couple weeks before the big game, and he's at football practice, and the coach calls him over in front of everybody and says, son, I don't know how to tell you this, but your dad had a heart attack this afternoon at work, and he didn't make it. The young man hit his knees and he's crying. And he gets up and he asks the coach, is it okay if I go home a little early from practice today? And the coach said, this is just a game. Go home and take care of your family. Don't worry about football. And the young man said, okay. And he left, and the big game came 2 weeks later, and it's like the third quarter and the kid hasn't showed up at all. all of a sudden he comes jogging out on the field and everybody's cheering, but his team's losing really, really bad. But it lifts up the team and everybody's cheering and stuff like that. And the kid runs up to the coach and asks the coach if he can play. And the coach is like, well, you're the worst player we've ever had, but we're losing anyway. Go ahead. And so he runs in there. First play, the kid intercepts the ball and runs it back for a touchdown. Then he makes all these tackles and he ends up winning the state championship for his high school. The worst player on the team ends up doing that for his high school, right? He wins the state championship and they carry him off that night. That night, as the coach is leaving the locker room, he sees a young man sitting on the back in the corner all by himself. And he walks over and says, man, just take as long as you want. Don't worry about anything. Just take as long as you want. The young man said, thanks, coach. The coach says, hey, I need to ask you something. He goes, the young man says, what's that, coach? He goes, I don't know how to ask you this, but he goes, you're not really the best athlete I've ever coached before. He goes, you're not really, you don't catch, you don't throw, you don't do much. But man, that was a great game of football tonight. What happened out there? And the coach said, coach, I don't know if you know this or not, but no matter what, no matter if I sat on the bench and I didn't play, you didn't put me in the game, or I lost the game for us, no matter what happened, after every game, my dad would come give me a hug and tell me he loved me and how proud he was of me. And the coach said, man, you have a great dad. And he goes, yeah, I did. And the coach starts to walk off and the young man says, coach, I don't know if you know this or not, but my dad was blind. And tonight's the first night he ever really got to see me play. And just like that, I got relief. Just like that, because I know that every time I walk into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and I say, my name's Jason Johnson, I'm alcoholic, my grandma gets to see that. I know that every time I see a new person sitting in the meeting I don't know, and I walk up and ask them if I can get them a cup of coffee, and I share the program of Alcoholics Anonymous with them, my grandma gets to see that. Everything I have is because of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Everything I've done is because of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And because of you, my grandma gets to see those things. And today I'm good, right? And I remember thinking to myself, man, when I die and I get to that big meeting in the sky, that's where I'm going to go, because I want to make sure there's a Bill, a Bob, and a Jesus, right? And I know who's going to be greet me when I get there. It'll be my grandparents. They'll be in the parking lot probably. My grandpa, if you're not 30 minutes early, you're late. So I don't know how that works when you're dead, but he'll probably wave at me because he never knows I never know where I'm going, right? And so he'll wave at me and I'm going to walk up to him. And for the first time in my life as an adult, because I've been hugging men in Alcoholics Anonymous when it wasn't convenient or necessary, I'm going to be able to hug my grandpa for the first time and tell him I love him and thank him for giving me a safe place to live. You know, and my grandma, on the other hand, she's probably going to be praising Jesus and thanking God and dancing around, and I'm going to be able to hug her. And I know what she's going to do. She's going to hug me. She's going to tell me she loved me. She's going to tell me she's proud of me. But most importantly, I'm going to be able to look my grandma in the eye and say, Grandma, it's the damnedest thing. These people in this program called Alcoholics Anonymous, they found a solution to their problem and they introduced it to me. But most importantly, Grandma, some of those folks showed me some grace. In doing that, they introduced me to that kid inside of here that only you believed existed. I owe you for that. I can never pay that debt back. I know that's the greatest gift I've got, you know, and I know that, man, that might not be a big deal to you, but if you're powerless over alcohol and you've traded everything away, it's a big deal to get that relief, right? You know, and with this story about, I don't know, a year ago, I had to go speak at the Indiana State Convention, you know, and I get to this convention and if I find out it's the 5 Midwestern states or 5 Western states, Midwest states or whatever, they all get together and they do this thing with their GSRs, their delegates, their pasta. I mean, it's all service stuff, right? And I look at the guy that's my host. I said, man, you got the wrong guy, right? I steal money from AA. I cause fights in my home group just for entertainment. I'm not the guy you should have as your banquet speaker. He goes, oh, no, we want you. I was like, man, I'll pay my own way home, right? I'll have one of my friends fly out and give you a great talk. I just don't think I'm the right guy for this service stuff. He said, nope, you're the guy we want. And the slogan for this weekend for the convention was a seat for everyone. So I thought to myself, well, this will bite him in the butt in a couple of days. So I said, okay, man, I went to everything they had, man, and I had a blast. I got to learn a whole bunch about service and what they do and how it happens and how it goes down. And what, man, I was on fire, man. I was like, yeah, this is what it's all about, right? And that Saturday night, I had to give the banquet talk at the dinner, and I give this talk. And, you know, at the end of the talk, they had these things called gratitude lines. I don't know why they call them gratitude lines, because there's like 10% of the people don't like you. Like somebody will walk up and say, hey, my sponsor said I have to thank you for an hour of my life I'll never get back. And then they walk off, or somebody will stand in line and tell you, hey, you talked about drugs, or somebody will tell you, hey, you shouldn't have swore, you know, and yeah, it's just, sometimes it's not always, hey, thank you, right? Sometimes, yeah, AA has some characters, right? So I'm in this line and I'm shaking hands, and I look, and when I look up, I catch eyes with this older lady. She stares right at me. So I look down because it was awkward, right? And I look up again and she's staring right at me. And I'm thinking, man, this lady does not like me. That's the lady. She's pissed. I either said something wrong or I must have swore. I don't know, but she's mad, right? So I'm just shaking hands. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm thinking to myself, she should be here by now, right? I should be getting yelled at or whatever by now. And so I look up and she's not there, man. And I just got relief, right? I just thought, oh, thank you, God. And I look at the back of the line and she's at the back of the line staring at me like, oh, Jesus, she's right there. So now it's like, oh, man. So, man, it's like, thank you, thank you. And finally it gets down. It's just her and I. We're just standing there and she's looking at me and I'm looking at her and I'm just thinking, here it comes. And she looks at me and she says, man, I'm a grandma. Can I give you a hug? I was like, absolutely, man. I thought you were going to rip into it. I didn't say that. I was like, absolutely, right? And I give her a hug and we start hugging and she's kind of crying. And she starts talking to me and she tells me, man, I have a granddaughter out there who's 24 years old who's running and gunning. And she's doing a lot of bad things with her body. And she's saying, people are saying a lot of bad things about her, but I love her. And she's my granddaughter and I'm not going to give up on her. And I said, we talked a little bit more and I found out that she was not a member of Alcoholics Anonymous and she was not a member of Al-Anon. The only reason she was there that night is her friend that prays for her granddaughter every Sunday at church. Her and her husband had banquet tickets to that banquet. And her husband got sick and she invited her about 15 minutes before the banquet to come hear a story of hope. She goes, I want to thank you for giving me some hope. Right. And we kind of just stood there and I just thought to myself, man, this is an amazing kind of thing. And she starts to walk off and all of a sudden she turns around. She says, hey, do you know why your grandma wrote all that stuff down in those books, all that money? I said, no, I asked my grandpa and all he would do is change the channel on the TV and laugh and said he didn't know either. And I said, she goes, I know why your grandma wrote all that down. I go, why is that? And she goes, because your grandma knew no matter all the bad things people are saying about you and all the bad things you're doing, that one day you would come back and make that right. She's proud of you. And she walked off, right? And I remember I started crying. I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was crying because I had gratitude for the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And I sat down and I'm sitting, I had my hands on my head trying to figure out what just happened. Did I make amends to my grandma in person? Was that her? And the things that go through your head. And all of a sudden I see these feet standing by me. And I look up and there's this big kid just standing there, man, with a big old beard. And he's like, I felt that. And I'm like, holy crap, what do you feel? So I stood up. I go, what do you mean you felt that? He goes, I heard everything that lady said and it gave me goosebumps, man. I got goosebumps. He goes, I felt that. And I was able to share with him. I said, you know what? One old timer told me, he said, if you ever get goosebumps or a tingling feeling in something, that's God rubbing your back and telling you you're welcome. Right. And he just looked at me and we hugged and we talked a little bit. He walked off. I don't know, maybe 7 months ago, 2 months ago, I was at the North Carolina State Convention and I give my talk on Saturday night and they have this gratitude line and it gets down to this guy, it's just me and this kid and we're standing there and this guy's looking at me. He goes, hey, you know who I am? I said, no. He goes, I'm Paul, the guy in the end of your story. And I looked at him and said, man, you had a beard. He goes, that was COVID. My wife made me shave it. And we started talking and he goes, I need to share with you something. I said, what's that? He goes, when I met you, I had 60 days of sobriety and I just done a second step. And I believed there was a God, but I didn't know if God knew who I was. And so my sponsor made me pray as if. So I get on my knees every single morning and I say, God, I don't know if you know who I am, but I'm Paul. And I was wondering if you could help me stay sober today. And he said, I said that over and over. And I met you that day. And you told me that when I got those goosebumps, that was God's rubbing my back and telling me, thank you. And what that did for me is I knew today that God knows who I am. He says, and what I do today is I say that prayer you say every day, Jason, that you shared with us. He goes, I get on my knees and I say, my dear friend, if you see fit and be thy will, I sure appreciate it if I could stay in Alcoholics Anonymous another day. Thank you for my sobriety.